Hi, Natasha.
Hi, good morning for me and good afternoon for you.
Good morning to you. It's so good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me today on Michelle's Conversations That Matter. Appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Awesome. Of course. Of course. So, we are going to talk, and this is my first AMA, and you are a very courageous soul because this session today is designed for anybody who has any questions. You have said to me, no question is off limits. If they want to ask a question about bipolar disorder, you have graciously said you are going to answer that question and help people understand bipolar. So thank you so much for saying yes and doing this with us today. We're excited that you're here. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And I think asking questions is a great way to get knowledge out there because if one person is wanting the answer, then you know many people are.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, for those of you who are joining, if you have any questions, please just drop them in the comments and we are going to loop back shortly. We're going to go through some basic questions that Natasha wants to share with us a little bit about her story. But we will get to your questions, so please drop them in the comments. But before we kick off, just a little bit about my series. Michelle's Conversations That Matter is really designed to do just that, cause open conversations around emotional and mental well-being to really help us educate ourselves and hear people's personal stories, because with more conversation we can remove the stigma. So that's a little bit about the series. What I get to do professionally is I work with organizations to help them recenter their employees and build resilience in the workplace, and that's something that I'm very passionate about, that I love to do. We need more compassion in the workplace because there are so many people who are struggling. So, with that, Natasha, could you do us a favor? Introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, where you live, and what you do for a living.
Sure. So my name is Natasha Tracy, and I'm a mental health writer and speaker. And I live outside of Vancouver, British Columbia, so in Canada. And I have been writing professionally about mental illness and speaking on the topic for the last 11 years. And I was doing it non-professionally before that for about 7 years. So I have spent the last 18 years basically researching bipolar disorder, living with bipolar disorder, and figuring out how to communicate about bipolar disorder. That's who I am, and that's what I do.
How long have you struggled with, or how long were you diagnosed with bipolar disorder?
So diagnosis is such a fuzzy line for some of us with bipolar disorder. So if you were to ask my mother, for example, she would tell you that I had symptoms of mental illness even as a child, but those were unrecognized. Also, I grew up in a family that didn't believe in psychiatry. So I actually didn't seek help from a psychiatrist until I was 19 or 20 years old. So it was at that point that I started receiving psychiatric care, and the diagnosis of bipolar disorder actually was initially discarded. I went to a psychiatrist and told him what was going on for me, and it was very severe. I was in a very severe depression, and I was extremely suicidal, and it was destroying my entire life. And unfortunately, the psychiatrist diagnosed me with minor depression. Now, I know that that was not what was going on. I knew it at the time. I had done my research ahead of time, and I knew that I had bipolar disorder. However, being a young person and sitting in front of this person who had so much power over me, I did not have it in me to disagree with him.
Right.
So when he said minor depression, I just assumed he knew what he was doing. And so I just took the medication that he prescribed at that time.
Wow. I mean, it's amazing when we start to educate ourselves, and then I can't imagine being a young person and wanting to challenge a clinician who has that level of authority, but yet knowing that it wasn't right. I can't imagine being in your shoes. So talk to us a little bit about, you also are an author, and Carrie over here is commenting that you have an amazing book. So tell us about the book and tell us about Bipolar Verbal, I think it's called. Tell us a little bit about these
That's
things.
right. So I write a blog called The Bipolar Burble, which is at natashatracy.com. And it's an award-winning blog that I have been writing since I started writing. So it's actually been around for about 18 years. There's about 600 articles on it right now. And it's something that is basically my passion. So when I'm thinking about something, when it's on my brain and it doesn't fit for what's going on with the client, that's where I put it. So many topics about bipolar disorder are covered there. Things that matter to me, things that I think matter to other people. And there's a lot of engagement with the community. So it's a really special place for anyone who wants to learn about bipolar disorder or anyone who has bipolar disorder. And then my book is called Lost Marbles: Insights into My Life with Depression and Bipolar. It's available on Amazon. And I wrote this book a few years ago to basically make a central repository of information about bipolar disorder and cover all the things that I think that an individual needs to know, particularly when they're first diagnosed with bipolar disorder or depression. So I have chapters on things like suicide, and I have chapters, I have a really hopeful chapter on the end about enlightenment. And I have in there an algorithm for bipolar treatment and another one for depression treatment, specifically that will tell people these are the frontline treatments, these are the second line treatments, etc., so that people can actually have a conversation with their doctor that puts them more on the same level with their doctor. So their doctor doesn't have access to all this information that they don't have.
Yeah, that's great. Oh my goodness. I mean, talk about empowering people. And, I love that. You also, the reason why I met you is you were a very courageous speaker at the One Mind at Work event that I recently attended in September. And I was just really blown away and impressed with your courage to openly talk about this. What has you become this speaker and this outspoken educator?
So it's interesting. The first time I did a public talk, it was actually for the National Council of Mental Illness. Or mental health, I suppose they were calling themselves, behavioral health. And so the National Council is a major organization, and they asked me to do a talk actually specifically on blogging about mental illness because my blog is so popular and so well regarded. And that talk was amazing. I got to meet amazing people who were interested in educating about mental illness. And that's, of course, what I wanted to do. And it was it almost like turned on a light switch in my brain that said, this is what I need to do. I need to be in front of people and speaking to them. Writing is wonderful. I will always do it. But standing in front of people is a bit different. Actually connecting with people, looking them in the eyes, sharing my personal story. Those are things that hit harder when you're actually in front of people. And then after that, I actually got hired by a nonprofit to speak in schools. Right. So I've spoken to many, many teenagers about mental illness and mental health stigma and lots of interesting things about bipolar and depression. And then, of course, I've spoken everywhere now, across North America, basically. And I love to do it. I love to talk to people and see them and answer their questions. This is something that keeps me going every day.
I love it. That's so great. We need that. We need more people who are willing to, talk to our young people, just be outspoken, just educate us on your experience, because when there's more open conversation, there's less people drawing their own conclusions of what something really is. You bring them, first of all, the face of bipolar, and you educate us. So I think it's great. And I really acknowledge you for that. And I think it's so needed. When we got together and I was getting to know you a little bit, we had a conversation, and you shared with me that you had this trip to Europe where you found yourself in a really, really dark place. And it was probably the beginning of, I guess, your whole experience. You said, yes, I was upset about nothing. So tell us about that moment when you were just so confused and were like, I'm upset about nothing.
Yeah, so that was when I was 19 years old, and I had been backpacking across Europe for about 6 weeks at the time. And I was in a little tiny pension in Spain. And I remember it very clearly. I was by myself, and I got up and I closed the shutters so that it was pitch black in the room. And then I got back into the bed and I cried. And I cried and I cried. And it was at that particular moment that I realized that if I could be that upset in that incredibly amazing place with the beautiful people and the azure water and the white sands all around me, and I was upset about nothing, that I knew that there was something really wrong with me. At 19, I didn't know what that was. I could not have told you what bipolar disorder was, let alone that I had it. I only knew that something was really wrong and I needed help. That was what I knew at that moment. I knew that I was really sick.
I'm having, as you're talking, I'm having like memories of my mom. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I just remember her sobbing. And as a little girl, I was looking at her and trying to get her to tell me what was wrong, and there was just nothing that she could say that was wrong. And so as you're telling me the story, it's taking me back, and it's reminding me of just how the sadness that it had overcome her. There was no explanation for it. It was just sadness. And it's just, it's powerful, to see someone and you don't want them to suffer. So I can only imagine at the age of 19, when you're just trying to discover who you are and what you want in life, to be, overcome with that. And yeah, my heart goes out to you. You also shared with me.
I just want to say one thing.
Yes.
One of the common things that people ask me in real life and online is, when I'm really depressed, they say, why? Why are you really depressed? That question I get all the time, right? When your friend, for example, is crying, you say, why are you crying? That's a totally normal question, and everybody asks it. But the answer to that question is, it's because I'm depressed. There is no reason. There's no reason needed. There's no experience in life needed. There is nothing terrible that happened to me. There is no tragedy going on. It's because I have depression. That's it. That is the reason. That's the reason why your mom was sad, and because she couldn't vocalize it, because there is nothing. There's nothing to vocalize. There's nothing to point to. And it's one of the most helpless feelings you can have, and one of the most helpless feelings your loved ones can have, because you realize that you became depressed over nothing. And what the heck corrects nothing?
Right. And I think that's where our friends and family would want to come in and say, oh, count your blessings. Look at all the good that you have in your life. So talk to us a little bit about how maybe that won't serve a situation like that.
Yeah, so people will often say things like that, like other people have it worse than you. And yes, count your blessings, and you're never given more than you can handle. And there's a lot of trite things that people will try to tell you when you have depression and when you're upset. But this is actually known as toxic positivity. It's positivity that actually hurts instead of helps. So positivity is good. I try to maintain a positive outlook every day, because that's something that actually fights the depression. However, toxic positivity comes in and it blames the victim, as in, it's your fault that you can't see that you have so many blessings. It's your fault that you're depressed. It's your fault because you don't understand that other people have it worse. Why don't you understand that? It's victim blaming. It's saying, it's your fault that you're depressed. You don't have a positive enough outlook. And that is not right. And that is not fair. People who have depression have an illness, a serious illness of the brain. And that illness is not something you can think your way out of. And it's definitely not something you can think positive your way out of either. So what ends up happening is, when people say those kinds of things to you, is you just feel worse. You feel worse about yourself. The depression gets worse. And basically, you don't want to talk to that person ever again, because they made you feel worse about how bad you're actually feeling.
Right. But they came from a good place in wanting to try to help. So that's where we need to recognize, when we aren't educated in how to deal with people, or how to navigate our relationships with people with a mental illness, we have to recognize we have a role in how we show up for them. So I think that's a really, really good point. My father used to tell my mother to snap out of it.
Yes.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. I think that's fallen by the wayside. I don't hear people saying snap out of it anymore, as if you have a choice. So it's really important, really. So you have been an advocate throughout your journey. I mean, you explained to us earlier about how you knew something wasn't quite right with your treatment, with your diagnosis. So talk to us about being your own advocate, and you have kittens there too. So
I do. I'm so sorry. There are cats, and they're
we are animal lovers.
Sorry.
Don't worry. I am an animal lover, and I think a lot of people here are. But so talk to us about the importance of advocating, because it is not easy to navigate the mental health care I guess, world, right? Who to go to, the type of care. So talk to us about being an advocate and why you found it so important to take that on.
Well, so as I said, the first person who I saw, the first psychiatrist, misdiagnosed me.
Right.
And I knew that I was misdiagnosed, but didn't have it in me to do anything about that. And so what that led to was about a year of medications that were never going to be successful for me. And so that's a year of treatment that I lost. That's a year of life that I lost because a guy didn't listen to me, right? And so eventually he went on summer vacation, this particular psychiatrist. And so my case was given to someone else. And this new person, this new psychiatrist did listen to me, and he did correctly diagnose me with bipolar disorder. Now, even though I had the correct diagnosis, it still took a very long time and many, many treatments for anything to work. Now, what actually happened with this new psychiatrist was I was on the medication merry-go-round, as I call it, right? So medication after medication after medication that were all failing.
Yeah.
And then eventually one day I went into my psychiatrist's office. He looked at me, he threw his hands in the air, and he said, "I can't help you. You're no longer my patient." He had fired me.
Wow.
So I had no idea that doctors could do that, but it turns out that doctors can fire patients, and he did. And so at the time, I was extremely depressed and suicidal, and he still dismissed me. Now, I was very lucky in that I did have a counselor who stayed with me during that time, and I did see him during that time. And he literally kept me alive while the psychiatrist would not see me. And after months of this, barely staying alive, my counselor said to me, "If you want to survive, you need to go back to your doctor."
Right.
And of course, I didn't want to go.
Right.
The guy had given up on me.
Right.
But I didn't see an option. I was so desperate to get better because I thought I was going to die. And so when I did finally see the psychiatrist again, he agreed to see me, but he didn't know what to do. So he said to me, he goes, "There's this medication over here that's not being used to treat bipolar disorder, but that we think might work. So why don't you take that?" So he guessed, in other words.
Yeah.
And it just so happened for me that actually was a miracle medication for me. And I did start getting better at that time. But it actually took years to get me to that place. And it took so many medications to get me to that place to where a psychiatrist actually made basically an educated guess. And I was very lucky that that educated guess was successful for me. Now, that alone is enough to teach you about advocacy. It's enough for you to understand that it is not okay for a psychiatrist to dismiss you and not refer you to someone else.
Right.
I literally could have died in that time, and it would have been at his feet. It is also extremely important to actually say to the doctor, "I think you're wrong," when the doctor is wrong. Yeah. And I know that that's almost impossible to do when you're a patient. Believe me, I totally get this. I have lots of techniques for how to talk to psychiatrists on my blog. But basically, the simple answer that I would give is that take someone to your appointment with you who understands what's going on and who can be your backup and say, "I think you're missing this. I think you're missing this diagnostic symptom." Mm-hmm. And always ask a doctor to explain why they're doing what they're doing, because it's not okay for a psychiatrist to just say, "Okay, here's your med, bye-bye." That's not really how these things should work. You should understand why the diagnosis was made and why that treatment was selected. And obviously my book really helps with that for people, but regardless as to whether you get the book, you should do your own research about that kind of thing and have a very open conversation with your treatment provider so that you understand why that person is doing what they're doing. And then sometimes, when they explain that, it starts to make a lot more sense to you. And other times you can say, "No, I think that's wrong because I think you're missing X."
Yeah.
And that's really important.
I love what you're saying, because it's taking power back to educating ourselves and speaking up for what we don't understand. So we're not just blindly accepting, because, at the end of the day, doctors practice medicine.
Yep.
you know? So before we go on, we have a question. I'm just going to start throwing these up because I want you to answer them for folks. Maybe they have to leave. But Mike has a really good question based on what we just spoke about. He said,
Mhm.
what would be the right thing to say to someone who's depressed if those positive words are toxic positivity?
Okay, well, thank you, Mike, for asking that question. I think that number one, I would like to say that it can be really hard to respond when someone is being in that toxic positivity way. And I just want to recognize that. It can be really hard to say something about it if you are extremely depressed. But if you're looking for something to say to that person, it might be something along these lines. I'm just going to call the person Joe who said the toxic positivity. I call a lot of people Joe. So, Joe, I appreciate that you're trying to be helpful right now, but I think that your advice is a bit misplaced. Right now, what I need you to do is listen to me and not offer advice. That's basically the message, which is that thank you. I appreciate your good intentions. And then just say, it's not working for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just need you to listen right now, because
Got
their
it.
listening may be the most support that they can offer. They may
Right.
not be able to offer you a single piece of useful information,
Right.
truthfully, but
Right.
they can still listen to you and support you in that way. And then the other thing you can say to that person is, if you want to know why that's not very helpful, there are some resources that I can offer to you that will educate you a bit more about what I need. And then
Right.
you can give them a book or a website, print something out for them, write something to them, or whatever. But there are lots of resources on articles on what not to say to a person with bipolar disorder, and what not to say to a person who has depression. And those kind of articles are going to really educate that person about, okay, I made a bit of a misstep there.
Right. So maybe the short answer is don't try to rush to the table to say anything, but be generous in your listening and generous in your heart, and just be there and listen to where they are in the moment, and provide support.
I think it's really important to realize that every person wants to fix you. And it's
Yeah.
not because they have some kind of sinister plot behind it. It's
Right.
because it's natural to want to help someone who's in pain. It's
Right.
natural to want to fix a problem. However, in the case of mental illness, you cannot be fixed.
Yeah.
Nothing a person says to you is going to fix you, and nothing is going to make it okay for you. The only thing that's going to work for you is long-term treatment to get you better, because it's an illness. If you have a broken leg, nothing anyone can say to you makes it unbroken.
Yeah.
Nothing makes it not hurt. And
Right.
depression is exactly the same.
Amazing. You are a wealth of knowledge, my dear. Let's talk about, suppose somebody is here listening and they are questioning whether or not they're feeling like they might have bipolar disorder. What would you say to them?
So that is for sure a difficult position to be in, right? If you think that you have a mental illness, maybe you're not sure. The first step is see someone who is qualified to diagnose that illness. So see a psychiatrist in the case of bipolar disorder, whether that means getting a referral from your GP, whatever you need to do, make sure you get some kind of information from an actual psychiatrist. A GP, so your family doctor,
Yeah.
may try to diagnose you, but that's not their job, and it's not appropriate for them to do it, because that's not what they understand. Your GP
Mhm.
understands a lot of things, but what you have to understand is that mental illness is a specialty. There's a reason why people specialize in it. And it's the reason why we have psychiatrists. And those are the only people who should be diagnosing and treating bipolar disorder. It's critical to understand that. And then the other thing you want to do is educate yourself about bipolar disorder. I really don't believe in self-diagnosis. Yes, I said that I knew that I had bipolar disorder, but in all honesty, I could have been wrong, right?
Right.
I am not a psychiatrist either. You are not a psychiatrist either. You have to allow for the possibility that something else is explaining your symptoms. So what really matters is that you understand what's going on for you, whatever your symptoms are, and you write those down and take them in to talk to a psychiatrist about them. For example, when I take showers, I am terrified. When I do this, this happens. When I do that, that happens. That's the critical stuff. Walking in and saying, I have bipolar disorder is not actually helpful for a psychiatrist. But what is helpful is laying out, these are all the symptoms that I have, and this is how I experience them. And then that way, and then they should lead you through an interview where they ask a lot of questions as well. But basically that way you can lay everything out before them and say, this is why I think I have a mental illness, and this is why I need help.
Right, right. And the other barrier I see is either fear of treatment or embarrassment someone's going to find out. So talk to us about someone who might just be really afraid of what does treatment look like because I'm unwilling to take a medication, or I'm unwilling to do talk therapy. Talk to the person who might have trepidation around getting care.
So first of all, I think it's really important to realize that treatment is scary. People are scared of it for a reason. It is actually very scary. And people could have heard horror stories. People could have people in their family who had horror stories. Things like that can happen. And then when the person is terrified, it's actually very reasonable, their fear.
Yeah.
That being said, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't get treatment, but the fear is real, and it's important to realize that. One of the big fears that I know that people have who are getting psychiatric treatment is that they don't want to be locked in a psych ward, right? They think that as soon as they see a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist is going to say, you're crazy, I'm locking you up against your will and you're never getting out, right? And even if that's not maybe the most rational thought, it's something that many people have and is totally normal. However, it's really important to realize that psychiatrists don't regularly take people and walk them over to a psych ward and lock them in there. That's not a common experience. There are very few reasons that a doctor would ever put you in a psychiatric facility, particularly without your consent. Very, very few. So it's really important that you be open with the psychiatrist with whatever is going on for you, and say to that psychiatrist, if you need to, I'm really scared of psychiatric facilities. Do you think that's something I should consider? Just be open. Be open with your fear, because as soon as you start to confront that fear starts to lose its power. Yeah. So I think that's important. And understanding that, I understand that some people say they're unwilling to take a medication or unwilling to go to therapy. I know some people say that. But absolutely, positively, 100%, if you want to get better, you need to do what it takes. And that means seeing a doctor and usually taking medication and generally going to therapy. That is what is required to get better. You're sick, and sickness requires treatment. And at some level, you have to understand that you have to actually do that treatment. And in psychiatry, that treatment involves a lot of work on your part. Yes, there's medication, but that talk therapy involves a lot of work. Whether you do cognitive behavioral therapy or another kind of therapy, it requires you to actually put the effort in to learn things about yourself and your coping skills. Now, if your goal is to not be on medication, you might be able to make that goal happen down the road. But when you're acutely ill, it's like you having a broken leg. You can't say to the doctor, don't set it. You can't say to the doctor, don't fix my leg, because it will never get better.
Right. Really good. Really, really important message. We have a question from Anita. I'm going to throw up here. She wants to know what can help with sleep when you're having a manic episode. And I think this is very common, sleep deprivation. So talk to us about that.
Well, hi, Anita. So sleep is a major issue in mania, and in my experience, also hypomania. So what I have noticed happens is that sleep is one of the first things to go when an upswing for mania or hypomania is occurring. And if I allow that to occur, so if I allow myself not to sleep, I give in to that feeling that I want to stay awake, I want to do things, blah, 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 then I'm going to make that upswing, so that hypomania or that mania, worse. That's what's going to happen to me 100% of the time. It's basically like the illness is in your ear saying, don't sleep, don't sleep. And you have to actually speak back to the illness and say, no, I'm going to sleep. Because what ends up happening for me is if I do manage to get some sleep when I'm in that situation, that is the best way of actually righting the mania or the hypomania and bringing me back to a level that is more reasonable. And the reason that this is really important is because mania or hypomania, when you go up, you end up coming back down again. And what I always say to people is the higher you fly, the further down there is to fall, and the bigger the crater you're going to make when you get there. So the idea is to actually abort going up so that you don't have that downswing that is so incredibly severe, that depression that is so incredibly severe. Now, when it comes to actually getting sleep, there are lots of things to consider. So sleep hygiene is really important. So a sleep routine is really important to have every single day of your life. So before the mania ever happens, you need to have decided on a sleep routine for yourself. So for example, maybe you go to sleep every night at 11. You need to go to sleep at the same time every night, no matter what. It doesn't matter if there's a party. You can't stay out. You need to go to bed at 11. It doesn't matter if friends are over. You need to go to bed at 11. It doesn't matter if you're watching a movie. You need to go to bed at 11. That's something that is critical. A sleep routine where you go to bed at the same time every single night is going to help you get to sleep when you don't want to sleep. And there should be a routine around it such that, say at 10 o'clock, you say, at 10 o'clock, I turn off all screens and lights. Screens and lights will make your brain activated. You want to turn those things off to start deactivating your brain so that it can calm down and get ready for sleep. If for some reason you can't do that, they do have blue light blocking glasses that you can purchase off a place like Amazon. And blue light blocking glasses are something that can help your brain turn down even when lights or screens are on. And I highly recommend them. So say an hour before bed, you put them on, you look really goofy, no big deal. They're orange, so you look a little funny. And that helps turn your brain down. So you need a routine where you turn things off or you put on your blue light glasses, and then you do something like read a book. You know, you want to do something that actually calms your brain, and something like TV is going to activate your brain. So reading a book is actually a perfect thing to do before you go to bed. So you make a routine for yourself. You say, you know, at 10, I'm going to turn off the screens. At 10:15, I'm always going to brush my teeth. And then at 10:30, I'm going to start reading. I'm going to read for half an hour, and then I'm going to go to bed. And you do it every single night. Wow. Because what that does is it trains your brain. It says, this is the routine, and this is when I sleep. So it trains your brain so that you can fight when the mania says to stay awake. And then while some people do not want or do not have sleep medication, I do really recommend it in this situation. And I do not recommend over-the-counter sleep medication. That can interact with your medication in a way that you won't see coming. I recommend you go to your psychiatrist and say, when I'm in a manic episode, I can't sleep. I need something that will help me sleep. There are Z-class benzodiazepines, they're called. They're called Hypnotics, and there's a few of them on the market, and they're very successful at initiating sleep. You know, some doctors are not comfortable prescribing them. It's really up to you if you feel that's appropriate for you. But I personally think that it's critical when you're trying to get to sleep. The other things you can do are things like muscle relaxation exercises. You can do yoga that is calming, and that's going to put you in a state where you're more willing to sleep, and breathing exercises. Those things can help as well.
I love it. Wow. Wealth of knowledge for everyone. Honestly, I think sleep hygiene is like something that we all need to be taking a little bit more seriously, because it really does affect how we feel. So thank 100%. You for sharing. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that stuff. So just for the folks who are here, this is an Ask Me Anything. So no questions are off limits. Feel free to drop them in the comments. We want to answer those for you. Natasha's graciously agreed to answer whatever you want an answer to. And before we get into that, I have a couple of questions that some folks who I know wanted me to ask who couldn't attend today. So I'm gonna throw out a couple of questions for you. And this might be a little uncomfortable, but you said no questions were off limits. So my one friend wanted to know specifically, hypersexuality is something that's associated with bipolar. I know I've known people who have had that. So talk to us about hypersexuality. First of all, what is it? And then any thoughts around how that people can manage that as well?
So the first thing that's important to realize is hypersexuality is a real thing, and it's a real symptom, and it's something that really happens to people. And what it is it's like taking your normal arousal and your normal sexuality and turning the dial up to 10. That's what it's like. It's like walking around and being one giant gland. Everyone looks appealing. Everything looks appealing. It's your sexuality, but it's your sexuality times 10. So you might do things that are very out of character to you because you normally, for example, maybe you only sleep with one person. But when you're hypersexual, you have the urge to sleep with every person you see. You may decide to even sleep with a gender that you don't normally sleep with, because that is how high up your sexuality is turned. It is so unusual to what you would normally experience in your life. And I think that it's important to realize that if you are in a monogamous relationship, you need to put some boundaries in place and some rules that say, here's how I'm going to handle hypersexuality when it occurs, not if it occurs, when it occurs.
Yeah.
I can't guarantee every person out there with bipolar disorder is going to be hypersexual, right? I can't say that for sure. But what I can tell you is it's awfully darn common. So, it's really important to deal with it as a symptom, but also the hypomania or mania overall. Because if you turn down the mania or the hypomania, you turn down the hypersexuality as well. So if you just look at that one symptom, you're kind of missing the broader picture, which is that you have a much bigger problem than just the hypersexuality. You have a problem of hypomania, or you have a problem of mania, and that, excuse me, and that needs to be dealt with on the whole. So now when it comes to hypersexuality, I think it's important to, one, realize that it's happening. So you need self-awareness. You need to be able to say, one, I'm hypomanic or manic. Two, I'm hypersexual. And three, this is out of character for me. Right. Those are the three things that you need to remember when this is happening to you. And then you need to put rules in place that says, I might be hypersexual and I might want to sleep with every person on the planet, but that's not me. That's the illness talking. That's not me. Right. And so I have made a rule that I am not going to have sex with people who are not my husband or whatever, whatever your particular rule is. If you're single, for example, you can make a rule that I am not going to have sex with anyone without protection, for example. Right. Because when you are hypersexual, it might seem like protection doesn't even matter because you're flying so high, you're not thinking. You're not thinking about consequences. That's why you have to plan ahead of time and say, if I become hypersexual, when I become hypersexual, this is what I'm going to do. This is my plan. I'm going to deal with the hypersexuality, but also I'm going to call my doctor and I'm going to make sure that he knows or she knows, and that I'm going to get the medication to deal with that upswing immediately. So it's not dealing with the hypersexuality, it's dealing with the whole thing.
Got it. So, and thank you for answering that, because I think that that's something we don't talk about. That's like something that is associated with bipolar, but it's not comfortable to talk about it, so people don't. So I really want to thank you and acknowledge you for answering that, just as you did. So we talked a little bit before we went on the air, Natasha, about communicating to those that we love and those that we work with that we've been diagnosed with something. And that is such a very uncomfortable place to be. And I have friends who had a lot of trepidation around sharing, for example, with their boyfriend or their girlfriend that they were diagnosed bipolar. So talk to us about, how do we broach those conversations with people in our lives? And then, God, how do we do it in the workplace?
Yeah, so I've written a lot on that topic because it is such we all face it, right? If you have a mental illness diagnosis, you will face having to tell people, whoever that person may be, a significant other or your family members or whatever, right? So the first thing I think that's really important is, if you're dealing with a loved one, remember that this information is going to be very hard on them. This information was hard on you, right? When you got that diagnosis, it was tough. And when you got that diagnosis, it took time for you to deal with the reality of that diagnosis. And it's going to be the same for the person that you tell. It's going to be a hard piece of information for them to deal with, and it's going to take them time to deal with it. And unfortunately, during that time, they may be very unhelpful. So they may say things like, you say, I have bipolar disorder, and they say, no, you don't. That's a natural reaction. Denial's a natural reaction because they don't want you to be sick. They don't want you to be in pain. They don't want that for you because they love you and they care about you.
Right.
So they may say all kinds of things that are really not helpful for you. Like, oh, have you tried exercise and yoga? Oh, yeah. If I had a nickel for every time someone told me to try yoga, I'd be a very wealthy person. So I think that you have to understand that it's coming. It's probably coming from the person. And so what you need to do is give the person some information about how you experience the illness, whatever it is. So you say, I have bipolar disorder, and that means that I do have upswings, and those look like this. I experience this symptom, I experience this symptom, I experience this symptom. Because as we know, bipolar disorder looks different for everyone.
Right.
So telling someone you have bipolar disorder isn't actually the most helpful thing because it's such an umbrella term for what you personally experience. So you need to give the person a bit more information. You know, I experience depressions, and when I experience depressions, this is how I experience them.
Wow.
And you want to give someone that information without entirely overwhelming them. So you can't give them every experience you've had, but what you can do is give them some examples of how you experience that bipolar disorder. And then you want to say, I know that this is very difficult. Here is some information for you. You know, please read this when you have time, when you have space, when you're ready, and it's going to educate you a bit more about bipolar disorder. And then hopefully that person will read whatever you give them, and you and that person can actually talk about it together. You can say, well, you know, on page 4, it says that blah, 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 blah. And you can have a discussion about page 4, whatever it is. That's an ideal situation, right? Many situations are not going to be ideal. And sometimes the lag time between when you tell someone and when they can accept it is years.
Yeah.
And when it comes to talking about a mental illness at work, I think it's really critical to understand that mental illness is just an illness.
Right.
Consider what you would do if you had another very serious illness, like, for example, cancer. Would you tell people? How would you tell people? Why would you tell people? Only consider the fact that with mental illness, there's a lot more discrimination and prejudice against mental illness than there is against something like cancer. And so my advice, and this is my advice from my own personal experience, is don't tell people at work. Now, this isn't because everyone's closed-minded, and this isn't because everyone's unfair. It's because some people are closed-minded and some people are unfair.
Right.
And as soon as one person at work finds out, everybody finds out. And that's something that you need to really consider before giving anyone that information about yourself.
Right.
In my experience, you know, something like discrimination against people with a serious mental illness can be fairly overt, but of course it can be very covert. It can be them, you know, your manager finding out and then indicating on your performance review that you are not performing to the standard, even though 6 months ago you were performing just fine before he found out that piece of information about you. So you need to consider that those things can happen. If you do end up deciding that at work you do need to disclose for whatever reason, and there are good reasons to do it, you should be filling out the paperwork that protects you under the Americans with Disabilities Act, so that your manager is actually on the hook for not discriminating against you. No, that's not going to protect you 100% of the time. I wish it did, but it will offer you some protections when it comes to them like flagrantly firing you or something like that.
Right. Really good. Because I know that these are the questions that people are thinking about. You know, they don't know, you know, how to engage in those types of conversations. So you're really giving them important nuggets here. And I can't thank you enough. And, you know, we have Carrie Martin is here with YouTube. She's coming through on YouTube. And her question is really around the power of sharing lived experience, just like you're doing right now, Natasha, telling your story. Do you believe in the power of people in the right format sharing themselves to help us remove stigma?
Hi, Carrie. Thank you for asking. I do think that there is so much value in sharing your personal experience, right? My personal experience is mine, it's real, it's powerful, and that's all great. But gosh darn, someone else is going to have the flip side of that experience. And that experience is equally important and equally powerful and equally important to get out there into the world. So if it were up to me and there was no discrimination and prejudice, then yeah, I say everyone should share their personal experience because we're all so unique. And what we're struggling with is very much different. And yet we're all in the same boat, right? We all have different oars, but we're all in the same boat. That's basically what it looks like. And so when you talk about your experience, you broaden the conversation. You say, gosh, she never talked about this, and this is my number one symptom. That's really important information. Well, why isn't anyone talking about your number one symptom, whatever it is for you, right? And I think that, so there's the value in that is limitless.
Yeah.
It's just that you have to pick your moment and decide if you're the right person to do it, because your intentions may be out of this world, but if it harms you, if giving your life experience a voice harms you, your life, your job, your lifestyle, your school, whatever, then you have to consider if it's worth it.
Yeah, really good points. And earlier, before we went live, the question came up from someone around, can you work or go to school once you've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder? So you want to speak to that?
Sure. So I think that this is a question that I get a lot. People say, can I do this after I have bipolar disorder? Can I do that? And the answer is probably. So I can't guarantee that you're going to be able to do what you want to do after a bipolar disorder diagnosis. Some people are extremely debilitated and disabled by a bipolar disorder diagnosis and know they can't do things. They can't do things like work. They can't do things like go to school because the illness has taken such an extreme toll on them. They've become very disabled. That being said, most treated people can do things like work and can do things like go to school. What I tell people is your goals are still your goals. However, it is very likely that you'll need to find a new path to getting there. So I was in university when I was getting treatment for bipolar disorder, and I wanted to get a bachelor's of computer science. And what I found is that I was so debilitated by the illness, I couldn't keep up with a course load. And I couldn't get the grades that I had been getting previously either. And so what I ended up doing was taking only 3 courses a semester, so really downgrading what I was doing. And then I ended up doing 7 semesters back to back to finally get my degree. So my degree, I did get it, but it took me a year and a half longer or 2 years longer than I thought it was going to get it, because I had to downgrade what I was doing to such an extreme degree. Plus, I did not get the grades that I wanted. So if I were to actually apply for a master's program, that would affect me. But I am extremely proud of the fact that I stayed in university and I did get that degree, even though it did take a very long time and was very difficult. And what I tell people is that can be you, right? You take what you're doing, you modify it in such a way that it makes sense for you, and then you try and achieve your goal in a new way. Take a new path, get to the same destination.
Great. And I know so many beautiful people diagnosed with bipolar, diagnosed with depression, who are living their lives, who are actually they're successful, they're thriving, they're business owners, they're number one marketers in the world. They're just phenomenal. So I would say, don't let it limit you. And what you said, just maybe you have to manage your expectations. So really, really good thoughts here.
And I do want to make one quick point on that. And I want to say, and I hate to disagree with the host. I hate doing this, but sometimes bipolar disorder will limit you. And I just want to say that it's not your fault. Sometimes the statement, don't let it limit you, is really tough, because it might limit you. And if it does, that's not your fault. We have a rhetoric in our society to push through, keep going, aim higher, be perfect, get those expectations up, and so on and so forth. We have that as a narrative that we all buy into. But
Right.
that's not a narrative that works once you have a serious mental illness. Once you have a serious mental illness, you need to carefully consider what you can do, how you can do it. And sometimes, like I said, you can't get to the goal that you want because of the illness. And if that's you, that's not your fault. Sometimes an illness will do that to you. Not all the time, but sometimes it might. And people have to understand that if that's them, it's okay.
Thank you, Natasha. Really, really great. So we, oh my goodness, have reached the end of our time together. Is there any other final words of wisdom that you want to share? And then please let everyone know how they can connect with you and learn about you and what you offer.
Yeah, so I just want to say that if you have a person in your life with bipolar disorder, if you know someone, the most powerful thing you can do, and the thing that I tell people a lot, is this. You say to the person, now that you know that they have bipolar disorder or another mental illness, you say, this doesn't change how I feel about you. This doesn't change how much I love you. This doesn't change how much I care about you. This doesn't change my impression of you. If anything, I realize you're stronger. Because what we are all scared of as people with mental illness is that people are going to turn their backs on us. And it happens, right? We are scared of that for a reason.
Yeah.
But if you are someone who loves someone with a mental illness, tell them that that's not you. You are a person who cares, and you are going to keep caring, and you are going to help them fight this thing in whatever ways you can. That's the powerful message that we need to get from you.
Amazing.
Now, when it comes to contacting me, it's really easy to do through my website at natashatracy.com. My blog is there called Bipolar Burble. You'll see it. I also have masterclasses there. There's actually 10 on-demand masterclasses that have a variety of topics covered that people find, I think, very useful. And my book, of course, is called Lost Marbles, Insights into My Life with Depression and Bipolar. It's available on Amazon. And of course, I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, and all that information is available on my site.
And you also have a free ebook. Tell people how they can get a hold of that.
If you go to my site at natashatracy.com and you sign up for my newsletter, you will get access to a short ebook that talks about mental health coping skills. So this is something that I put together for people just to start the conversation around, here's some coping skills that I think will work for people to help their mental health. And that's available to you for free just for signing up for my newsletter. And of course, you can unsubscribe anytime.
Natasha, I can't thank you enough. This has been remarkable. You shared so much knowledge, so much wisdom. You shared so authentically. Thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing yourself with us. I really appreciate it.
You are very welcome. And as I said, thank you for having this conversation. More people need to have this conversation in more formats and in new venues. So I really appreciate that.
All right, my dear, let's stay connected, and thank you for the great work you're doing in the world.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.